Welcome to the Unlist. Today we are celebrating Shanuary. I made a Shanuary video last year, so I didn't want to remake that video again. So we are going to laser focus on specifically the Egoïste line in our celebration of Shanuary for this year. Since this is more of a celebration video, I'm not really going to be critical of the fragrance that much. I mean, I own the fragrance. I enjoy the fragrance. If you're looking for a more critical analysis, then I suggest go finding someone who's never smelled it before. So I'm just going to throw it out there that this is more of a celebration video than it is a actual sort of, real critical look, a real breakdown of the fragrance. So I'm not doing that. I will go over the notes, though, and tell you how it smells, but I'll give you that much. So, Égoïste and its sibling, Platinum Égoïste, they inhabit a very special place in the hearts of many Chanel fans who are into the older fragrances. If you're someone who came on board around Bleu de Chanel or came on board around the Allure line, you probably don't really go further back than 2000 anyway, if you even go that far back. You probably just wear Bleu de Chanel and one of the Allures, and that's it, right? You don't go digging into the back catalog. But if you're someone who really likes the whole spread of Chanel men's fragrances, then the Égoïste and Platinum Égoïste releases are a bit near and dear. And of course, the arguing and debating over which batch is best, over whether the original Égoïste is better or the discontinued Cologne Concentrate Flanker is better, or the pre-release version of Égoïste called Bois-Noir, if that one's better. And it gets really trite, honestly. It gets really trite, and the people who have these like very bitter discussions, and I do mean bitter, angry, miserable, sad people that hold their bottles of perfume like this, like that, and you're just kind of like, right? And they're like, and you just don't want that level of hostility, not over a perfume, right? But I've said it before, and I'll say it again a million times. People just don't. They just take stuff so seriously, and they get so personally attached. And to them, it's like a question of honor when it's just smelly water in a fucking bottle. Come the fuck on, really. So we're going to have none of that in this video. Absolutely none of that. So if you're that person, I'm going to kindly say, leave. Not welcome here. You can go a step further and unsubscribe to my channel. I don't care. So I've been made aware by some of these same people that my unseriousness is displeasing to them. I don't dress well enough. I don't do my hair well enough. I even had someone call me out for wearing pajamas in my videos. And I'm just saying, you don't know who you're dealing with here. Because if I was willing to wear work uniforms and pullover sweaters and make videos on the rooftops of buildings and in blank white rooms for a whole year and not give any fucks, what makes you think I'm going to care about whether I'm in pajamas or not, or whether my hair is messy, or whether I have a hat on? Clearly, I am not here to impress anyone. Okay? Never have been. So all I'm here to do is talk about fragrances, hopefully entertain you a little bit, give you some knowledge and insight, and then let you go do whatever it is you're going to do, right? So we're doing that live and let live thing here, folks. That's what we do on this channel. We live and we let live. So if you come at me with the live and let die stuff like Paul McCartney, I'm just going to push you off a cliff. All right? So don't do it. It's not worth it. You will not enjoy the outcome if you do that to me. Just putting it out there. You will not like the outcome. So, Egoïste is been considered a sort of pet project for Jacques Polge because these were the days when Chanel was very hands off with their house perfumer. They really looked at the perfumes as separate from the fashions. Karl Lagerfeld was the creative director for decades. He remained creative director through all of this stuff. But he did not really touch the perfumes. In fact, he had his own perfumes under his own brand that he messed with. He didn't really get involved with the perfume side of Chanel. That was left alone. And Jacques Polge was more or less left alone in those years. Not true after the 90s, of course. And it's primarily because of Egoïste and the way it sold, or I should say the way it didn't sell, that he started getting more direct supervision from creative directors, from heads of R&D, from marketing, because he lost them a bunch of money. And what's crazy about it is they didn't fire him. They didn't fire him. They just started putting on guardrails. This day and age, with how everything is so fast moving, if you don't turn a profit, you're out. You know, if your product doesn't sell well, it's pulled from shelves like immediately. You get fired right away, right? This is not the same environment as 40 years ago. 40 years ago, they'd be like, okay, we're going to take a different approach, but we're going to let you work things out. This is a different world back then. People got second and third chances. They don't now. But the story with Egoïste is it was a pet project of his. And from what I've seen, he was trying to take the old Ernest Beau perfume called Bois d'Isles and trying to turn that into a man's fragrance. He wanted a men's version of Bois d'Isles. And if you smelled Bois d'Isles, you know it's pretty difficult to take that and make it masculine. It wasn't overtly feminine to begin with, but it had a lot of flowers in it. And men didn't really like flowers, especially not in the 80s. In the 80s, it was all about big, heavy pine, castoreum, lavender, big, clean, soapy notes, animalic musks, you know, Coros, Antaeus, which was another Chanel fragrance, you know, Xerius, Dracar Noir, all that stuff. That was the de rigueur, if you will, of the 80s. So here's this delicate, floral, woody fragrance. And he wanted to make it into a man's fragrance. That was a very noble endeavor to undertake. And the original version of that fragrance, which I have a small sample of, came out in '87. And it was called Bois-Noir. So Bois d'Isles, but darker, right? And if you smell Bois-Noir, well, those of you who smelled Egoïste, you will recognize right away. It's basically just Egoïste. Egoïste under a different name. And it was given a soft launch in '87. They only made one batch of it. And it was sold in limited quantities throughout different key cities in the world. So New York, Tokyo, Paris, London. I think that was it. Just those 4 cities. People could buy Bois Noir from the Chanel boutique in those cities. And this was before the days of focus groups and bringing people in to test stuff on them and have them give you feedback. They were using the entire market, in effect, as consumer testing. They were doing their consumer testing in the field. They wouldn't do that now. You will never see this again, where they will take a product and consumer test it with the general public. I mean, they used to do it with sodas and stuff back in the day. I mean, you know, 7-Up had DN, what was it called? They had some kind of weird upside down 7-Up product that they did a sort of like a test on like that too. Same sort of thing. You know, there were a lot of products that were kind of put on the market to see if they would sell. But we don't do that now. Nowadays, all that testing is done in-house. But we're talking the 80s, a little more of the Wild West. So, I think it was this 7 Up. So it was DNL, I think it was called. Let's say DNL or something. And it was the reverse of 7 Up. Anyway, point is, Égoïste, under its original name of Bois-Noir, had a soft launch. And all of you weird batch code, deep vintage obsessives who think that everything discontinued and everything old is automatically better than anything still being made and anything newer. Like, the more rare and the harder it is for you to have it, the better it automatically has to be, because everything good gets taken away from you because you're a completely cynical, misanthropic, miserable person, right? Who has no business being on my channel anyway. But if you're somehow here, I'm taking you, lifting you up by your shirt collar and hanging you from a doorknob, because that's where you belong. Anyway, for your information, Bois-Noir is like 95% the same to Égoïste. The only differences I picked up was a little smokier, so a little more birch, and there is a bigger sort of rosewood thing going on with it. So the rose itself is less prominent in Bois-Noir, and the citrus seems darker. So more of a heavy orange smell, less of a tangerine smell. So therefore, darker citrus, less floral, tiny bit smokier, but when it dries down, you get to the base, it's the same dry down. It's the same amberette seed, the same sandalwood, the same potpourri spices that's in Égoïste. It's not really different, okay? Vanilla is still a part of it. All Jacques Polge really did once the consumer testing came back was tweaked it a little. Now, why they decided to run a 3-year-long test on the fragrance, I don't know. But it kind of tells you right off the bat that there wasn't trust in the product. If they did a 3-year release under a different name, a limited release, because they weren't sure about it, that tells you that the entire development process, when he started working on it in the early 80s, all the way up until 87, like I said, it was his pet project, that the people at Wertheimer were like, I don't know about this one, Jacques. I don't know. You could tell they didn't have faith in it. So that right there is a red flag. These days, if there's no confidence in the product, it doesn't even come out. They're not going to consumer test it, pussyfoot around about it. They're just going to be like, no, you can't have this. We don't think this is going to work. Or they'll bump it up to a luxury range. They would put it in 2025. If this were to come out brand new all over again, it would be a $400 less exclusive fragrance. This would be in their niche segment because they would not trust it. And they'd have every right to not trust it because you smell this. And even in the context of the 80s, this was just a strange bird. I mean, like I said, big, bold, woodsy, musky, tobacco-y, or big soapy fragrances in the 80s. This is soft, spicy, floral, potpourri. You know, it's just not what guys were really looking for in the 80s. And when it came out in 1990 was the eve of the changeover to what? To cleaner, more transparent, more aquatic, fresh fougères. This stuff was already an oddball in the 80s. So when it was finally launched in 1990, it was even more of an oddball. But again, this man's pet project. So they just, after the money was spent, the time was spent. And you have to also consider that Jacques Polge delivered in so many other ways. Coco was a success, okay? Antaeus The first men's fragrance in 25 years was also a success. Okay. They successfully relaunched Paul Monsieur. They made a different, heavier, more fougere version of Paul Monsieur. They took the original one and they retired it. They brought it back later, but they took the original one and they retired it. They brought out this heavier one, and it was a success as well. And then they had also released a de parfum version of number 5. People do not realize that Jacques Polge actually created the eau de parfum version of number 5. Before the 80s, there was only the parfum and the cologne and the eau de toilette. That was it. They retired the cologne. The cologne went bye-bye. The eau de toilette was moved down to where the cologne used to sit. And then the eau de parfum slotted in between. So before it was parfum, eau de toilette, cologne. Cologne phased out. Eau de toilette moved to the cologne price slot. The eau de parfum squeezing its way into the middle, and then the parfum moving up market to a higher price. And Jacques Polge created the eau de parfum. So, from scratch. A little different. If you are a big number 5 fan, I don't know if you're a big number 5 fan, but if you smell the eau de parfum, you smell the eau de toilette is more like what your grandparents had. And then the parfum is also more of what your grandparents had. But the eau de parfum in the middle, cleaner, less musky, less aldehydes. Okay. More modern for the 80s, I guess. So, a lot of successes, man. He had a lot of successes. So they were probably willing to let him put out this complete boondoggle fragrance because he had made them a bunch of money already. They were going to let him have his misfire. So what happened was they tried to make up for the fragrance with advertising. They figured if they made a huge push in advertising, maybe they could convince people to buy it. So one of the biggest, most notorious ad campaigns in the history of Chanel, where the doors swing open and the women come out in the balcony and they scream, "Égoïste," real loud like that. Really strange commercials. They were shown on TV and no context given. No fucks given, too, I should say. No context or fucks given. And people were like... And they went out and they smelled the fragrance, right? It got people to smell the fragrance, so it worked. It surely worked. But they hadn't spent that much money on commercials since number 5. Okay? And it was a man's fragrance, too. So it's really, really noteworthy for having such a big ad campaign. Unfortunately, after the first couple of years, sales began to slough off. Complaints came back that the fragrance was not strong enough, because it is a very light fragrance. Even the older bottles, and here again the miserable batch bastards. Yeah, the old one, sandalwood, oak moss. So, here to tell you that I have smelled those old splash bottles of Egoïste before they had sprays. And I've smelled the column bottles. I've had one of the column bottles as well. Yes, they had sandalwood in them before my source sandalwood became, unsourceable. They were a bit richer. They were a bit heavier. But this was never a powerhouse. If you spend like the $2,000 on a vintage bottle of 1990 Egoïste, you're not going to get like Polo performance. Okay, you're not. You're not getting one-man show performance. So if you go into it spending that kind of cash, if you spend used car money on a bottle of vintage Egoïste because you think you're going to get something with the same strength of like, I don't know, Koros, then I'm just going to point and laugh at you because you're not. Okay, it never was a strong fragrance. Richer, yes, Rounder, yes. A little more plush, yes. But not really stronger. Okay. Which is why in 1992 we got the cologne concentrate version, which was a bit spicier, a bit woodier, a bit more solid, less aldehydes, less sparkle, okay, than the original Egoïste. A bit more of a stiff cuppa, if you want to use English terminology. So that's what it was. If you are someone who likes the coriander and the rosewood facets of Egoïste a little more, then you'd like the concentrate. Unfortunately, it's discontinued as well. So you're going to pay the same used car money for that. So if you're going to spend used car money on, a vintage bottle of Egoïste and then more used car money on a bottle of the concentrate flanker, at that point you just put a down payment down on a house for 2 bottles of smelly water. So have fun with that. I'm sure Rajadov would love to pay you a visit if you're willing to spend that kind of money on perfume. So, still, something had to be done about the sales. Okay? It was clear by 1992 and 1993 that the Egoïste line was not doing as well as Antaeus. Okay? So, time to prop up the name. The investment was already spent. We can't go back now. We can't discontinue, lose face, scrub the line. We can't do that. So, instead, a man named Francois Demachy, who was already head of research and development, okay? Francois Demachy had the job that Maurice Roussel would eventually have, okay? And then, once Christopher Sheldrake was brought on board, and Christopher Sheldrake became creative director that kind of sat alongside Jacques Polge, Francois Demachy was kind of given his papers, and he went over and did stuff for Givaudan and eventually ended up in LVMH and became Dior house perfumer as we know him now. But Francois Demachy's start, real prominent point in his career, like with Maurice Roussel, was at Chanel. And he made a lot of fragrances alongside Jacques Polge for Ungaro and Salvatore Ferragamo, because the Ungaro group was also owned by the Wertheimer family, who owned Chanel. So he already had experience co-perfuming with Jacques Polge on Ungaro fragrances like Ungaro Pour l'Homme 1, Ungaro Pour l'Homme 2, and eventually 3, and a few other things. So what they basically did was they kind of put the two together in a room and said, the two of you are going to bang out a fresh fougere fragrance that is like what's selling really well right now. Chanel does not like to eat other people's lunch. They think they're so original. They think they're so trend-setting. Everyone follows them. They couldn't possibly follow anyone else. But when the numbers come back and they're not doing so hot, they kind of eat their words. They swallow their pride. And they play keep up with the Joneses. Very infrequently do you see Chanel play that game. They have only played it a handful of times. So in the 2000s, they played the game with Coco Mademoiselle. And some, but not all, some of the Allure flankers were copycats of concepts. Not individual fragrances, but, hey, we need an aquatic of our own. Oh, Allure Homme Sport. There's our aquatic. Hey, we need a fresh, fruity, musky fragrance for women, right? Something to combat Calvin Klein. Something to combat Kenneth Cole. Oh, Coco Mademoiselle. There you go. Boom. Bingo. So sometimes they do that. They don't like to admit it, but sometimes they do play the, when in Rome, right? They do play that occasionally. And with 1993's Platinum Egoïste, they certainly did that. They looked at eternity for men. They looked at things like Aspen, like Bob Mackie for men, and Paco Rabanne's Excess Pour Homme, which had also just come out that year. They saw where things were going, and they're like, well, we should do this too. So in a very quick sort of fashion, right, they threw together a fresh fougere that is like the stuff that Calvin Klein was doing, like the stuff that had come before from like Drakkar Noir and so on and so forth, but done in a way that is on what I can best describe as the Chanel level, right? Which you know is very polished, very blended, no seams sticking out, no individual materials really sticking out, forming this kind of amorphous, singular smell. So originally it was called Égoïste Platinum. Again, the batch weirdos are going to come out of the woodwork and say, oh, Égoïste Platinum and Platinum Égoïste are completely different fragrances. They're not even the same. They're entirely different fragrances because the names are... No. No. Again, we're going to pick you up by the back of your collar and hang you from a fucking doorknob. I'll slam you in a locker like a high school bully. Okay, that's where you belong. So, Égoïste Platinum had a name reversal to Platinum Égoïste because once the fragrance began to sell so well, they wanted to distinguish it more from the original. They didn't want it to seem like a flanker, because if you recall, they didn't really do flankers. Chanel didn't really do flankers. Not until the Allure range came around, right? When the Allure range came around, they did flankers, right? After the Allure range came out, yes, Coco Mademoiselle, Allure Homme Sport, they did flankers by the 2000s. But in the 90s, they didn't really do flankers. So when they came out with Égoïste Platinum, and it did so well, they wanted to kind of walk it back. It's not a flanker. It's a different fragrance. We'll call it Platinum Égoïste. It's its own thing. Never mind that it has the same bottle, and never mind that it has the same cap, but it's like chrome plated or whatever. So, never mind that. It's its own thing. And this was also around the time that Égoïste itself got pulled from most markets. Only the major urban stores where it did well. So that's why some of you who don't live in big, wealthy places, you live in like smaller towns, you may have never seen Égoïste sold. Only Platinum Égoïste and stuff like that. Because it was kind of, when its sales began to decline, it kind of got walked back as well. And in some countries, like Canada, it got pulled completely. Canada lost Égoïste. Couldn't even buy it. Only Platinum Égoïste. So you have to go across the border to the United States if you want Égoïste, if you're in Canada, which kind of sucks. They did that to us with the original Paul Monsieur. They took the original Paul Monsieur away, and they brought it back for a little while, and then took it away again. But if we want that 1955 original Chypre fragrance, we have to cross the border or have it imported from a seller overseas. Anyway, Francois Demachy and Jacques Polge made this, and there's not as much to say, which is why I've spent most of the video talking about Égoïste properly and not as much talking about this. It's clean, lavender geranium, okay, oak moss, tonka. It's got some really compressed aldehyde choices up top. It's got some very sheer, sort of metallic, mineralic elements that kind of remind you of like dry cleaning, hot iron pressed to a suit. So it's trying to give you that structured, tie cufflinks kind of smell more of that proper businessman sort of vibe, and it succeeds. It succeeds in having that. This is probably one of the better office fragrances if you work in a law firm or any kind of higher end sort of desk job position where you need to look put together and smell put together. Even though this fragrance is, like I said, 32 years old now, doesn't smell dated, doesn't smell of the 90s. It's still a very nice, like, if you're going to wear Percival, if you're going to wear Invasion Barbare by Parfums MDCI, if you're going to wear anything like that, okay, and spend hundreds of dollars to wear it, let me just stop you. Save your money. Don't buy Himalaya. Don't buy Invasion Barbare. Don't buy Sartorial. Just get this. Because this is where it all started anyway. All of those other fragrances that had that metallic smell, the metallic fougere, fresh pressed, hot pressed fabric, it started here with this one. First fragrance to do it right here. Outside of that, it's just a fresh fougere. It's not much to say. Damashi and Polch kind of phoned it in here, but it is what it is. Égoïste is the far more artistic one, but it's didn't sell well. The Platinum Égoïste ended up in all the rap videos. Okay, it was a big favorite amongst the death row types, back in those days, back when the gangster rap was riding high. A lot of them loved to wear the Platinum Égoïste Chanel. So it has a bit of a pop culture status as well, the way the Creed does now, I guess, in some ways. So, okay, guys, that's been my video on Égoïste and Platinum Égoïste. Hopefully you enjoyed it. And if you didn't enjoy it, then, hey, you're the one that just wasted 32 minutes watching this video, not me. I enjoy making these.